What if more than 20 million deaths could be traced back to a single moment, a single decision, and a single bullet fired on an ordinary summer morning? It sounds impossible. How could one gunshot trigger a catastrophe large enough to engulf continents, destroy empires, and permanently change the course of modern history? Yet that question has fascinated historians for more than a century. Did one bullet truly start the First World War, or is the answer deeper? To understand the truth, we must travel back to Europe in the years before 1914, when peace existed only on the surface. Beneath elegant ceremonies, diplomatic smiles, and royal celebrations, powerful nations were growing increasingly suspicious of one another's intentions and ambitions. Military budgets expanded, new weapons appeared, alliances formed across Europe, governments prepared for dangers they believed were rapidly approaching. The continent looked stable from a distance, but underneath, tensions accumulated year after year like pressure building inside a sealed container. Germany feared encirclement. France remembered humiliation. Russia pursued influence. Britain protected its balance of power. Austro-Hungary faced growing internal instability. Every nation had concerns. Every government had ambitions. Every leader worried about losing influence in an increasingly competitive international environment. Then came June 28th, 1914, a date that would become one of the most significant turning points in world history. The city of Sarajevo appeared calm that morning. Citizens walked through streets, businesses opened, and daily routines continued as usual. Few people realized they were living through the final hours of a world that would soon disappear forever. Among the visitors that day was Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, accompanied by his wife Sophie. Their visit carried political significance, but neither expected the danger waiting along the streets of Sarajevo. A group of young conspirators had positioned themselves along the planned route, determined to carry out an assassination. One of them was Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old nationalist whose name would soon become known throughout the world. The conspirators believed dramatic action could advance their cause. Failure meant arrest, imprisonment, or death. Success could change history forever. As the motorcade approached, tension grew. Every second mattered. Every movement carried enormous consequences. Europe was already unstable. Political rivalries, military planning, and mutual distrust had transformed the continent into something extremely dangerous. It resembled a giant powder keg waiting silently beneath decades of diplomacy and international competition. All it needed was a spark powerful enough to ignite the pressure already building beneath the surface. That spark was closer than anyone realized. The countdown had already begun. Within minutes, a chain of events would unfold that no leader, soldier, or civilian could completely control, and the first attempt to change history was about to take place. The first assassination attempt did not go according to plan. A bomb was thrown toward the Archduke's motorcade, but the attack failed. The explosive bounced away from its intended target and detonated behind the vehicle, injuring others but leaving Franz Ferdinand alive. Chaos erupted immediately. Smoke filled the air, crowds scattered. Confusion spread throughout Sarajevo as officials reacted to the attack. For the conspirators, the mission appeared ruined. Their carefully organized plan seemed to be collapsing before their eyes. Some fled, others hesitated. Opportunities vanished. Success suddenly looked impossible. History often turns on decisions, but sometimes it turns on accidents no one can predict. Among those disappointed was Gavrilo Princip. He believed the chance to strike had already slipped away forever. The Archduke survived. Security increased. The motorcade continued moving. Everything suggested the danger had passed. Under normal circumstances, the story might have ended there. The assassination would have failed, and the visitors would return safely. Instead, a series of extraordinary events began unfolding, creating one of history's most remarkable coincidences. After the failed attack, Franz Ferdinand decided to visit individuals wounded during the bombing attempt. The decision seemed compassionate and reasonable. No one imagined it would place him directly in danger again. As the motorcade traveled through Sarajevo, confusion emerged regarding the planned route. A driver mistakenly turned onto the wrong street and suddenly realized the error. The vehicle slowed, then it stopped while attempting to correct its course. By incredible coincidence, the car halted only a short distance from Gavrilo Princip. Moments earlier, Princip had believed the mission was over. Now history was standing directly in front of him. The target had not been hunted down. The target had effectively arrived at his location. Princip reacted instantly. He stepped forward and drew his pistol. Witnesses barely had time to understand what was happening before the shots were fired. 2 bullets left the weapon and struck Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie. The wounds proved fatal. Within a short time, both victims were dead. The assassination shocked Europe. Headlines spread rapidly across borders and governments. Yet the deadliest consequences were only beginning to reveal themselves. The assassination immediately captured international attention. Newspapers across Europe printed dramatic headlines describing the deaths in Sarajevo. Public shock was widespread, but behind closed doors, political leaders were already considering far more serious responses. Austro-Hungary viewed the assassination not merely as a crime, but as a direct challenge to its authority and stability. Government officials demanded action. Many believed a strong response was necessary to preserve the empire's credibility. Attention quickly focused on neighboring Serbia, where several conspirators maintained connections to nationalist organizations. Austrian leaders became convinced that Serbia must be punished, regardless of the risks involved. An ultimatum was prepared and delivered. Its demands were severe, leaving little room for compromise. The Serbian government faced a terrible dilemma. Acceptance threatened sovereignty. Rejection threatened war. Leaders debated every condition carefully, knowing millions of lives might depend upon their decision. Serbia accepted many demands but rejected several conditions it considered unacceptable. Austria-Hungary declared the response insufficient. Diplomatic relations rapidly deteriorated. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary officially declared war on Serbia. At first, some observers believed the conflict might remain limited to the Balkans. That hope disappeared almost immediately as alliance commitments began pulling other nations into the crisis. Russia viewed itself as a protector of Serbia and started mobilizing military forces. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, interpreted Russian mobilization as a direct threat. German leaders responded with their own preparations, accelerating plans that had existed for years. Soon, military trains crossed borders, reservists reported for duty, and entire societies shifted toward war. France became involved through its alliance with Russia, expanding the crisis even further. Britain watched developments carefully, hoping to avoid conflict but increasingly drawn toward intervention. The alliance system now operated like a row of falling dominoes across Europe. One declaration triggered another, one mobilization provoked another, one fear created another. Events moved so quickly that few leaders could fully control what had already begun. Within weeks, Europe had transformed from a continent at peace into a continent marching toward catastrophe. When war began, many people believed it would end quickly. Governments promised victory. Citizens celebrated. Soldiers expected to return home within months. Across Europe, young men volunteered enthusiastically, convinced they were participating in a noble and necessary struggle. Crowds gathered at train stations, waving flags and cheering as troops departed for the front lines. Few understood that they were witnessing the beginning of one of history's deadliest and most destructive conflicts. Military planners expected rapid offensives and decisive victories. Reality proved far different. Advances stalled, defenses strengthened. The war settled into a brutal stalemate stretching across vast distances. To survive enemy fire, soldiers dug extensive trench systems that soon scarred the European landscape. These trenches became homes, prisons, and graves for millions of men trapped within the conflict. Life inside them was miserable. Mud covered everything. Disease spread easily. Fear never disappeared. Artillery shells exploded day and night, shaking the earth and destroying any sense of safety. Soldiers endured constant stress, never knowing whether the next explosion would be their last. The psychological burden became almost as deadly as bullets and shrapnel. Military commanders repeatedly ordered assaults across open ground despite devastating defensive firepower. Thousands advanced. Thousands fell. Entire units disappeared within hours during major offensives. Machine guns transformed battlefields into killing zones unlike anything previous generations had experienced. Technological progress, once celebrated as a sign of civilization, now increased humanity's ability to destroy itself. New weapons appeared constantly, introducing fresh horrors into an already catastrophic conflict. Among the most terrifying was poison gas, capable of injuring and killing in horrifying ways. Soldiers scrambled for masks whenever alarms sounded, knowing seconds could determine survival. The battlefield became a place where courage alone could not guarantee safety. Every day brought new casualties, every month brought new offensives, every year brought more suffering. Families received letters describing unimaginable conditions, though many realities remained impossible to express with words. What began as a political crisis had become a human tragedy affecting millions across continents. And despite the terrible losses, the war still had years left before reaching its conclusion. After more than 4 years of fighting, the First World War finally approached its end, leaving devastation on an unprecedented scale. Millions of soldiers had died. Millions more returned wounded, traumatized, or permanently changed by their experiences. Entire communities struggled to rebuild lives shattered by years of conflict, loss, and economic hardship. Empires that once appeared powerful and permanent suddenly collapsed under the pressure of war and political instability. The German Empire fell. Austro-Hungary disintegrated. The Ottoman Empire weakened dramatically. The map of Europe changed forever. Leaders gathered to negotiate peace, hoping to prevent another catastrophe from occurring in the future. Their efforts produced agreements intended to establish stability, punish aggression, and secure lasting international security. Among these agreements, the Treaty of Versailles became one of the most significant and controversial. Many believed the treaty would protect peace. Others warned it might create future resentment and conflict. History would eventually reveal that those warnings were not entirely unfounded. Yet perhaps the most important question remains the simplest one. Did the First World War truly begin because of a single bullet fired in Sarajevo? The answer is both yes and no, depending on how we choose to understand history. Yes, the assassination triggered the immediate crisis that pushed governments toward war. Without those shots, events might have unfolded differently, at least for a time. But focusing only on the bullet risks, ignoring the deeper forces already shaping Europe's future. Nationalism, imperial competition, military expansion, political rivalries, and mutual distrust had accumulated for decades. The continent was already under enormous pressure long before Gavrilo Princip raised his pistol. A useful comparison is a room filled with gas. The spark matters, but so does everything that filled the room beforehand. The assassination was the spark. The decades of tension were the fuel waiting to ignite. That realization changes the story completely. The war was not created in a single moment. Instead, it emerged from countless decisions, fears, ambitions, and mistakes made over many years. The bullet became famous because it marked the beginning, not because it alone caused the disaster. And perhaps the greatest lesson of World War I is that conflicts often begin long before the first shot is fired.